Please become a Patreon and support the show. Merci.
And now our host, Stephen Lee Morris.
This week, we're joined by playwright and screenwriter Doruntina Basha, who is based in Kosovo and is one of the few recognized female playwrights in the region. She talks about gender equity and her experiences working in a national playwriting competition, as well as having a play premiered in a rival country, Serbia, and what the reaction was when she returned home. Doruntina Basha, welcome to Animal Farm.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
You are in a rare category. You are an accomplished playwright and screenwriter, and you are female, which in Kosovo is an extremely difficult club to get into. So and you had mentioned, we had chatted a little bit last week, and you had mentioned that the movie industry, the impediments of working in the movie industry are not as severe as they are in the theater industry in the Balkans. And there's a couple of issues related to gender equity and opportunity for you to be to have a creative voice, to have a playwriting voice, a theatrical voice. I'd like to start with the first question. Because of your accomplishments, you were invited to judge a national playwriting competition, and I was wondering if you could talk about that and if issues of gender came up there.
It's an annual national play competition, which is organized by the state, by the Ministry of Culture. And usually there is a reading committee of 5 people. And this year I was one of the persons who was reading the plays. And it's the main and the biggest and the only one, actually, I think, competition.
Quick question,
Yeah.
What does it result in for the recipient?
Well,
or for the recipients, I should say.
Yeah, it's supposed to give to the first place, the first award, staging or a public reading at the National Theatre of the play. So the play that wins the first prize. And until now, there were no productions of the first place of this competition, but that's not what I want to discuss here. To go back to your question, if any gender issues came up in this experience, actually, it was very interesting because, of course, it's a competition with codes. So you don't get to read a play with the author's name, it's just a code. And you have no idea who wrote it. But, when you read without knowing the identity of the writer, you pay so much attention to like modes of representation and, like the
Yes.
voice. And somehow you just,
Yes.
you get a feeling of, who it could be. Is it a man or a woman?
Yes.
And some particular plays were easy to read on this level, some others were more complex, more complicated. But anyway, once the reading committee sat and we discussed and we made our decision, somehow we ended up speculating about the gender of the authors, because we had no other material to discuss anymore. We discussed the plays and everything. And it was just, we were just chatting completely innocently. And then one person who was representing a man who was representing the National Theatre was convinced that the play that got the most votes was written by a man, and the play that got the least votes was written by a woman. And, I was not sharing this opinion with him. To me, it was very obviously the opposite. anyway, we had a discussion around this, and in the end, when the results were published and when the authors were revealed, the person who got the most votes, so the winning play, was written by a woman, actually a young woman. And the person or the play that got the least, or it was not like in shortlisted, was written by a man. And that made me think how much more work we need to do here in Kosovo to somehow recognize the presence of women in theater. It's like they are there, they write their own stories and they have to be recognized. But also,
But
how
Dori,
important it is. Yeah.
couldn't an argument be made that actually that is a testament to the integrity of the system, that the leader of the National Theatre actually could not tell the gender of the playwright? That is also a testament to the artistry of the playwright, that she, if we can use that word, was able to disguise her gender and simply have a voice that was interpreted by this guy as male. Couldn't that be seen as a good thing as opposed to something that needs more work? That's not an opinion, that's a question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. And it was a very, very well written play, but the issue was that the play dealt with gender in a way, in a very particular way, which I think is very relevant to women who are dealing with gender. And I think it's just something very particular about writing about these issues that maybe not people that are not involved with issues that deal with gender representation, they just cannot pick up, So that was a very interesting experience,
Yeah, I just want to ask, how many applicants were there?
Unfortunately, this time there were not many. Usually there are quite a lot, but this time there were merely 6.
6 applicants for a national playwriting contest.
Yeah,
that is extraordinary.
But I think it's the first time that there's such a low number, because usually there are much more. I don't know, maybe it was the pandemic, or just.
And what was the gender makeup of the jury?
We were 3 women and 2 men.
And was there a uniformity of opinion on the gender of the judges as to the gender of this particular playwright, the winning playwright?
No. We were just, as I said, we're just speculating, But it's always interesting in these discussions and these speculations, like to make some observations.
Was the other man on the panel, did he agree with the artistic director of the National Theatre or not, in terms of just that one question of who wrote this play?
No, it was not really a debate, it was more like an observation from my side, it's not like we just, could be a he, could be a she, and the reasons, But to me, it was interesting to observe this, because I, in my work, I deal with gender a lot. And I'm always like paying like really attention to discussion like this, because for us in Kosovo, especially in theater, we still, as I said, we still need to do a lot of work to somehow have the women's voice in the theater. It's still not there. It's different in film, and we spoke about this last time. It's changing, but in theater, it's not yet.
And that is, can you attribute that to, I mean, I would jump to the conclusion it's just a kind of recalcitrance on the part of the artistic leadership, where we've always done it this way, and they're not changing systems. Is that accurate, or is that?
I don't know, actually. Since we had the conversation last week, I was thinking about it. I don't have an answer. I really don't know. It's because the cultural scene in Kosovo and the theater is very centralized in terms that it gets like all the funding from the state, and you don't really have an independent arts and theater scene, and the one that is there, it's barely existing. And you've been here, and you've seen it yourself. It's not like we have independent and private theaters, and we have the National Theatre, we have city theaters, which are also supported by the state, by the city councils. And we have like 2-3 small independent stages. And I think because of the system, it's very centralized, the support, the funding, but also somehow the mentality.
Yes. Yes.
Like the
Yes.
National Theatre, or the national institution, regardless if it's theater or a gallery, or the national institution has certain standards. It has tradition, and it's a bit conservative. And I think that has to change somehow, maybe.
Well, you're in Europe, and your neighbors, you just visited Germany last week. In German, these discussions are vibrant. In the United Kingdom, these discussions are vibrant in the art circles. What's the difference? Why are they happening there and not in the Balkans?
I think they're bound to happen here as well.
Yeah.
Just, it takes a bit more time to start the conversation. And as I said earlier, and as we discussed last week, it started in film in Kosovo.
So it has started in film. Yeah.
It has started in film. And I think it really is a matter of waves, it starts with film, and we have had a great year last year, this year. I mean, the past 10 years have been great for women filmmakers in Kosovo. Mm-hmm. And there have been so many distinctive women directors and voices in storytelling. And it's so encouraging to other women artists, when you see a success that is recognized. And I think this will spread to theater as well, and I hope very soon. But it's just a matter of, I don't know, it's just a matter of the scene somehow, shifting and, flowing. Yes. I'm optimistic, I think it will happen.
Yes. Interesting. We don't really have we don't have a state theater at all. There is some government support for theaters, but the entire movement is is regional and non-profit, or almost entirely. That's mm-hmm. excluding the commercial scene in New York, which is market-driven. But there are certain theaters that seem to rise to the equivalent level as though we had a national theater. They seem to mm-hmm. get the lion's share of funding, even if that funding is largely private, though not entirely. Mm-hmm. So it's just very interesting how the shapes, what Neil Labute might have called the shape of things, they seem to replicate each other, even if the systems are different. And mm-hmm. The independent theaters that you're describing in Kosovo, I think in Los Angeles, it's they're suffering in a similar way, a lack of funding, a lack of support, and the struggles are getting increasingly arduous for them to survive. So we're cousins, despite our completely different artistic systems. So that's interesting. Mm. Let's talk about this idea. One of the consequences of having a government that really does support the arts in the way that the United States doesn't, but that comes with costs, which I think you've already addressed. Mm-hmm. You had one of your plays performed in a country that was and probably still is a political rival, but not necessarily an artistic rival anymore. And you had success with that. I'm talking about Serbia, and your play was produced in Belgrade. And then you returned to Kosovo, having on the heels of that success, which would, in a sane world, would be a cause for celebration. What did you find when you returned home?
Well, this happened quite a long time ago now. It's been 10 years, mm-hmm. in 2011. I wrote a play that was staged in Belgrade. It was part of a regional Western Balkans contemporary play competition, and it won the first place. So with this first place, there was also part of the prize. It was that it will get a production in Belgrade, and it had a production in 2012 in Bitev Theater in Belgrade, and it was a success because, you know, it's not like every day in Belgrade you have stories from Kosovo or Albanian authors from Kosovo being staged, and also the topic of the play was about the war and the consequences of the war, and that's why it had a lot of attention. It really had a spotlight there. And yeah, I mean, I was expecting some sort of a success or similar path when I came home, but unfortunately it didn't happen for quite some years because I think the fact that the play had its first premiere in Belgrade was somehow considered unpatriotic, you know, and it was seen as, you know, like not a very smart move for me as a playwright.
I have a quick question. Just,
yeah.
I mean, in a way, it's in defense of your position. Did you have any opportunity to premiere this play in Kosovo?
I did have later in 2015.
No, but 10 years ago, let's say, which was what you're talking about, which was 2011.
Yeah.
Did that opportunity exist at this time?
Well, no. I mean, there was interest from theater directors who approached theater with my play, but they were turned down. And,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, in the meantime, the play was being produced in other countries. It was produced in North Macedonia, and it was also produced in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Sarajevo, and it was produced as part of a triptych in Vienna, in Austria. But then it took some years, and it took, you know, it had to be validated, you know, abroad in order to be accepted at home.
How did this nationalism that you're describing, this kind of, I guess it's resentment, to put words in your mouth, how was this actually manifested? How did you experience this? Was it conversations? Was it press reports? Was it?
No, it was just silence.
Mm-hmm.
It was silence and just, you know, rejection, silent treatment and rejection, you know. I mean,
yes.
it did not, I guess, you know, I was not happy about it, of course, because I wanted it to be staged at home. You know, it was a genuine Kosovar story, you know, and it represented our suffering, and it represented what we, you know, being of Albanian identity in Kosovo suffered in the war, in this horrible war. So, you know, of course, I wanted this to be shared with the audiences here at home, but it just didn't happen because, you know, it was somehow tarnished, you know, it had like this stain, you know. But at the same time, it had success in other places, in other countries, and in other theaters. So in a way, there was some sort of, I felt that there was some sort of justice for the story, because in the end, it's the story that matters.
Yes.
Eventually, it was staged in Pristina in National Theatre in 2015, and it was very well received, you know. So
just a quick backdrop for American readers who may not be up to speed with your local history. The war you're referring to is the war of 1998 and 1999, in which Milosevic and his Serbian forces committed to what many tribunals have referred to as a genocide against Kosovo and the Albanian, the ethnic Albanians living in Kosovo. And it took NATO bombings in 1999 to end that war, but the rubble is still there. So 21 years later.
It is. It's, yes, exactly. It's that's the war that we still remember because it was so recent, and it contains so many stories that still need to be told, as we haven't still dealt with our past, with our horrible past, you know.
Well, it's not that in the arc of history, it's a blink of an eye. It's only 20 years since.
Yeah, it is.
It's nothing. It's nothing. Of course, it hasn't healed in that time. Yeah.
No, I mean,
That's not
I
so
remember everything vividly, you know. I also meet people that were born after, like, that were born in 2000 and 2001, and, you know, they have a different perspective on what happened. But a lot of other people remember things like it was yesterday.
How
So
is your millennials, how is their perspective different from the people who experienced the war?
I think it is different because it is somehow constructed by these very standard narratives of the media and of textbooks, and then family stories. So it is a combination of these three. And of course, in the media, it's always present in one way or another. And in the textbooks, school, history, but, you know, it just lacks this having the experience of being a refugee, or, you know, being under this constant threat of a war, because, you know, we experienced the war in 98 and 99, but since 89, when Kosovo autonomy was abolished by Milosevic, we lived an everyday fear of, you know, war starting any moment. So it just lacks this because it forms you, of course, you know, when you grow up in this situation, it just shapes you. And it shapes how you relate to everyday life.
Yes.
You know, so yeah, it is. I think that's the difference. You know, it's just something that is not experienced, but is somehow, you know, it's like a memory created from narratives that were built afterwards. You know.
Yes. Yes, that's very, very interesting to experience the war and then to read about it in various sources and the difference between those two memories. Yeah, that is interesting. The final question I wanted to get to is you talked about the difference between, say, Serbia and Belgrade and Pristina, and perhaps you could include, well, let's talk about Kosovo and Serbia, and you could include Germany and the United Kingdom. Germany, the United Kingdom, and Serbia all have fairly established theater traditions. Kosovo does not. And the same argument could be made on the West Coast for Los Angeles. We have a robust film industry, and that is the tradition of the city. The theater history it's now finally being recognized as something, at least as an activity, if not an industry. But it was just not taken seriously at all. It was certainly not in the tradition of the history here. I'm wondering how that has affected living in a place without a theater history, how that has affected your opportunities as a playwright and then maybe as a screenwriter.
Well, yeah, Kosovo has, I mean, I would not say that it doesn't have a theater tradition. It has a very humble, you know, short theater tradition. Theater in Kosovo started after the World War II, and it was somehow established more, you know, as a result of enthusiasts coming together to make theater, you know, performances. And it took some years for people that were part of this initial movements to start to educate on theater, like actors, directors. And unfortunately, because in Kosovo we didn't have a theater school then, they had to go to school abroad. I mean, abroad. Kosovo was part of Yugoslavia, so, you know, they were educated on theater in, let's say, Sarajevo or Zagreb or Belgrade, you know, these other capitals of ex-Yugoslavia that had a theater tradition and theater school. And so gradually in the 60s, you know, like the National Theater, what is called now the National Theater, then it was like called the I don't know how to translate that in English, it's very difficult, but maybe Provincial Theater of Kosovo, because Kosovo was considered a province, autonomous province of Yugoslavia. So this provincial, it doesn't sound good in English.
Maybe I think we call them regional theaters, but I don't know if that's the same. I don't know if that's the same thing.
It's more a political status. It reflects the political status of Kosovo as an autonomy within Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
But never mind. I mean, it was established like that, and Yugoslavia was a socialist federation, and everything was centralized. So this theater was part of these theaters across Yugoslavia. So it started an ensemble and a repertoire, and that's where our theater tradition starts.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this history that Kosovo experienced was reflected in theater as well, because when in 1989, Milosevic abolished autonomy, all institutions excluded Albanians working in these institutions like overnight, because they would not comply with the new measures, like the Milosevic new measures. And so that there is a big gap there, an interruption there, And so since 19s, a lot of theater was improvised in alternative spaces, and, it was gone back to these enthusiasts and people who had the will to make theater, and not really part of a system or a structure that is producing theater. So I think in that sense, it is difficult nowadays to somehow, like have maybe a theater scene which is more a platform to promote or to recognize new and different voices.
Yes.
Because, as I said in the beginning, it's still very centralized, because that's the system. The system was like that, and it still is like that. It's centralized. And I think because of that, we still have this really conservative and traditional theater, which is in the system. But other than that, there are some changes, some movements. For example, there are city theaters which are being supported by city councils, and a lot of them really suffer financially, because city councils are generally poorer than the central government. So they're just
there isn't the money. Yeah.
But for example, just to take an example, the city theater of Pristina, and Pristina is the capital of Kosovo, and the city theater of Pristina doesn't even have its own budget line, in the city council. So in order to produce plays, each play has to apply individually for what is called a subsidy, which is very complicated. So people are just discouraged, who wants to go through all that bureaucratic process to get a play staged,
to get a production budget,
to get a production, which it is going to be very small. And so I think the general atmosphere is very discouraging, I would say, and I think that's what makes it really difficult.
Mm-hmm. 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 Do you see this changing in the near horizon, or do you think?
I believe it will change, because
or is it depending on the economy, on local economy?
I think it depends a lot on the community as well, and the theater community is growing, and it's getting more and more dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe I sound like an very idealistic, but I think they will change it. I think that the community has to really put pressure and have this changed.
Doruntina, Basha, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Next week, we're joined by Lisa Dring, a Los Angeles-based playwright who is a playwright in residence with the Play LA, a program of Humanitas. She has also had her plays developed at the Blue Mountain Center and La Jolla Playhouse.